Great. So thanks for being here at one of the Peertone webinars. Today, we're going to talk about future-proofing organizations as they scale. The whole idea is as you experience growth, what are the milestones? What do we need to address? What should we not ignore? And what should we be working on? There's always somehow this like trade-off to be made as you're growing, which is, how much do we spend working on the product or with the customers or on, our actual market-facing work, and how much time do we spend talking about what our goals are and our values and how we work together. And I think this trade-off is very palpable, and the tension is definitely there, especially in the early days of organizations who have to face kind of, okay, do I spend my time talking about what we're going to work on, or do we spend our time actually working on it? And we know that there can be some grave consequences if you go too extreme in either direction. So while grappling with this conundrum, I had the idea to speak with Thea, who's here today, and who spends her time working with startups and scale-ups to really talk about these issues, to point out what's the problem if we don't address issues soon enough, and to give them tips and pointers of where to start and how to future-proof their organization so that they don't one day realize that there's a huge gap in what they forgot to be working on. So without further ado, Thea, we're happy to have you here, and nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Nathan, and all the participants who will, of course, appear as we're retaking this, right? Yeah. Well, super happy to be here and to be able to share some of the work that I've been doing, and I look very much forward to hearing everybody's questions and comments and perspectives. So please do keep them coming as we move along in the webinar. And also, I know Nathan, that you have some great experiences and perspectives from Peertone, and we'll also look into the system later. But let me just share a few slides just to get your thoughts going, and then we can discuss. So let me see if this works here. Yeah, super. All right. So healthy growth, scaling is the topic. Scaling without hierarchy. I think we also teased that one on LinkedIn. I put in almost, because it's not a prerogative to be able to use what's in here and to participate in the discussion that you are in an organization without hierarchy, or even have an ambition of being 100% leaderless. You can still be inspired by a lot of this work if you do install some kind of hierarchy. So that's just a disclaimer here. Okay, just very briefly on me. My name is Thea, and I'm a consultant and work with developing startups and scale-ups, help them create organizations and cultures that can survive in a complex world and attract talent across generations and across nationalities. I also help founders grow as leaders, so coach on leadership, etc. I have a background in sociology, organizational psychology, and worked within the people and culture field for 18 years or so, as a consultant for the past 2.5 years or so. Before that, I worked in several different companies, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Microsoft, Too Good To Go, as you see in here. And then a few names of current clients, startup programs and scale-ups, Danish and internationally working. Yeah, please reach out. My contact details are here. And just to not only be professional, I also am a person outside of me sitting here talking about organizations, happily married, and like going to a nice party every now and then, and have 2 lovely kids that I love to go traveling with. So that's just a little bit more about me. Okay, back to the topic here. Scaling almost without hierarchy. Is that possible? It's a question that I actually encounter a lot in my work with startups and scale-ups, because what I see in their eyes is this. There is a fire, there's a need, there's a longing for creating different kinds of organizations for two reasons. One is that the world has changed, right? It's more complex. I know that the VUCA expression is volatile, uncertain, etc. World is an old expression, but it's really in our faces now, right? And the organizational models that we have are from a different time. So there is a calling towards organizing, working in a different way to be able to handle that. And then there is also a need for creating organizations, or a wish for creating organizations where people thrive more, where we can come as whole people, etc. And I don't meet a lot of founders and scale-up leaders who dream of becoming that like huge big boss. They want to create great workplaces, and they want to have an impact with what they do. That's really the fire in their eyes. And then they meet this, right? So they meet reality. They meet investors. They meet legal requirements. They meet also employees who have questions like, how can I do career, etc. So our reality is still very centered around this way of thinking about organizations. And that stops them from actually achieving the dream that they have about the way that they want to scale. But happily, there is a new way of doing things. So there is a way of going about this growth without building the classical hierarchy. And why is it then that things are a bit difficult? That what is it that they experience here in the middle? Well, it's reality. It's reality, a pressure coming from the context that they're working in, from investors, from within their own heads. I'm a leader, I should make the decisions. So the mindset that we're carrying with us, and also the employees that they bring in, they might be attracted to working in a flatter organization, but then all of a sudden, how about my career? So there's a lot of pressure to start building this hierarchy. Also, what are the alternatives? What else, how could we do things differently? They might not know. So they never move on to the new ways because it's just difficult. But it's there and it's possible. And a simple way of going about it is to look at your organizational culture. So take a point of departure there, because we all by now at least know that organizational culture is important when you want to attract, retain, develop the talent that is there to help you succeed. And what is organizational culture? In the foundation, and that's where we begin, we have purpose. So what are we here to do? What kind of growth are we looking at? Why do we want to scale? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And here is an important discussion about profit and impact. Something that is in some instances seen as opposite. Are we here to make money? Is that why we're scaling? Or are we here to have more impact? Is that why we're scaling? And investors and founders might have different points of view. But to have this discussion early, to agree that, okay, we're actually here for impact, probably, but to have that impact, we need some profit to fuel it. And to be clear what that purpose is. What is it, the impact that we want to have? Because also your organization, your team, your employees, they want to know what they're there for. It's key to the culture that you are building. Then there's the mindset. What are you thinking? What is your beliefs? You can call it values, you can call it principles. What is the kind of place that you want to create? As I was saying before, this is often because you want an organization that is fit for a very complex world, and also a place that is fit for humans. And I really like the words of Aaron Dignan from the Ready. Some of you might know him, but they talk about a mindset that is people positive, where you have trust in people from the beginning, and it is complexity conscious. So you know that things are changing all the time. So if this is the foundation of your culture, what kind of structures do you then want to put in place? So we begin not with the structures as you would usually do, just build up the organization. We begin with the foundation, the purpose and the mindset, and then we can start talking about leadership. What is the kind of leadership that you want to install? What are the roles that you need in your organization? How do they work together? And this is very much where PIDM comes into place. Help you get that overview of the roles and the leadership responsibilities and how you can distribute it in a way that will fit your culture foundation. And then last but not least, in the middle, you have all of your practices. This is where your culture really lives. This is where your organization, this is where things happen. And these are the things that as you grow as an organization, you build these practices. So first thing you need to do is start recruiting, right? Then there's onboarding. Then there's development. There's all of these practices that we have a lot of ways to do that are founded in an old paradigm. But there are new ones emerging that might fit your culture better. And that's why we can look at this culture canvas. So having an idea of the types of practices that are most important as you scale. These are the ones that I've met in my work with startups and scale-ups that usually are the first ones that they really need to install to not meet typical pain points later. So if you get your meeting practices in order, you know when to gather, how to discuss, how to decide, you're come a long way. And you can avoid that everything flocks to you as a founder team and you become the bottleneck because you've installed meeting practices that already are de-hierarchizing your organization. Flexibility, where and when do we work? Don't need to have a long winding discussions of whether you want remote employees, etc., because this you've put into place in the beginning, you've decided. Socializing, super important in smaller teams. How do you do this to create the right kind of culture? And then, of course, you have the kind of employee life cycle, the recruitment. How do you find and onboard new colleagues? Is it you as a manager, or is it the teams that hire for themselves? Do you do a lot of like media things, or is it network based? What will fit your culture again as you grow? Incentives, super, super important. Couldn't stress this enough. So you want this culture of transparency, but nobody knows who makes how much. And there's all these rumors going on, you know, really, really poisonous to your culture. Saying one thing, doing another, just because that's usually how we do. Or you want, you really want to be a purpose-driven place, but you heard that sellers don't want to work unless they get a bonus. So you hire sellers and you start installing bonus practices, and you kill that kind of impact purpose-driven culture that you have that you wanted to do, because now you need to scale and build a big sales team. So again, looking to different ways of doing things here. Learning, how do you develop? Is it you as a manager who's responsible for developing people? Or do you put that on the peers that they should use each other? Do you give a free budget for development because you actually trust people to find out themselves what they need to develop to fulfill the purpose of the company? So just examples of different ways of doing things as you grow as a company that will make you true to your culture and to become a company that attracts and retains future talent. Yes, hope that's useful. Just summing up a little bit here. So what are some of the traps in building a less hierarchical, more future-proof organization? Well, one thing is ignoring or postponing organization and culture. I see this a lot, you know, there is so much going on with sales and funding and product development. And so we'll just find some solution. You know, I used to work for this company. We'll just do the same recruitment process as they did. Or my sister works in a company where they have this performance system. Let's just do that. You know, we don't spend time finding the solutions that fit us, or we just don't install any at all, which is maybe even better, actually. But ignoring or postponing is definitely a trap. Then there is the other way, the opposite. And I know, Nathan, that you've told me about this, and I'm curious to hear more about your experiences, which is overthinking or overcomplicating things. We need to grow the organization, and we have to have all these meetings set up, and we need to do all of this socializing, and do we want to go this way or that way? And you just basically kill your business by overthinking the internal stuff. The last one that I've seen a lot also is delegating it entirely to your people and culture team. So as founders and leaders, you don't, it's a little bit ignoring, right? Because, you know, we have this people and culture manager, he or she can do the culture thing and the organization thing. So it's not linked to strategy. It's not linked to purpose. That is a trap as well. Then we have some of the barriers that are hard to overcome. I already mentioned them. Speed of scaling. So we don't have time. We just don't have time to do things in new ways. So again, we just download all solutions to the problems, and unfortunately go in a direction that we actually did not intend to do. So the speed of scaling. Then this needing to explain to stakeholders. It's difficult to explain to your VC that, yes, I'm the CEO, but I'm not making all of the decisions. We have a different way of making decisions where I trust in my teams to do that. So I will bring people from my team to our meetings because I'm not the know-it-all type of manager that you expect me to be. Is definitely one thing that I've experienced. And then last but not least, as we've talked about, this lack of knowledge of alternative practices. So what can you do? Well, connect with your peers, find them out there, because there are a lot of people who are trying this out. Find the examples, find the practices that are out there. Just, Google new ways of working, ask ChatGPT, how can I build an incentive system that will foster an inclusive culture? I'm quite sure that exciting things will come up. Get help, of course, expertise, systems like PDM that can help you. And then really, really important, you're not going to get it right first. So go for trial and error. Just go for what is good enough for now and safe enough to try. It's better to do something than to overthink or ignore. So just get going. Those were my words. Thank you for listening.
Super. Thank you, Thea. That's really condensed and insightful. That's awesome. Thanks. So I will open the floor. Are there any direct questions for Thea? Things that are on your mind as we move into this next section? Anyone speaking up? And then I'll fill in that little gap by getting the conversation rolling then. So I'm curious, Thea, if you've noticed, like, I'm thinking of there's this movie where it's like, the asteroid is coming and no one's listening type thing. So
don't look up.
Yeah, don't look up. Exactly. So what's the don't look up equivalent in organizations of being like, oh, I know we're really far behind on talking about how we do things and like being explicit, but customers are calling and investors want the numbers and yada yada. What is the cost of not looking up? Like when do you start running into problems? And or what I know that's hard to generalize across all organizations, but what are some of the patterns you've seen?
Yeah, well, I see decisions being made that later has a high cost. For example, taking in investments from investors who have a different view on how to build an organization. So if you haven't had that discussion in your founder team, that this is actually what we want to do, and we're very clear about the mindset that we have and the purpose that we set out to do, then there's a risk of investors, advisors taking over and building this organization because that's what they're comfortable with. And then you're trapped all of a sudden inside an organization that isn't the vision that you wanted. And I've seen founders split up over this. I've seen companies just dissolve. Another thing is to not look at onboarding. This absolutely does not go only for flatter organizations, but to just pour in people, because you need to scale. So you hire tens, dozens at the time, and don't onboard them to your culture. You haven't set up any practices that will ensure that they land and they leave again. And the cost of this is just it can break you as a company. But also key hires in the very beginning. So you're maybe a founder team of 2 or 3. You hired your first interns, your first younger developers, stuff like that, and then you need to bring in a CFO, and you find somebody who's really good, really great experience, but you forget to align on the cultural and organizational elements that we've just talked about. And you've spent a lot of time, probably used recruiting agencies to help you, and you bring this person in and it's just not a fit, and it's a waste of time and money and energy and everything. I've seen that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So,
what have you experienced?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I think that one thing that I've observed is if you sort of push it to the side, if you don't discuss this frequently enough at the beginning, and as you said, reiterate it, especially during onboarding, so like through cultural reiteration, then you start to see sort of symptoms popping up, like frustration around, I don't know, individual salaries, or around I don't know, like what career progression means here, or lots of like uncertainty about what it means to stay in the organization and to continue. Like, it makes sense what a day-to-day work means, but and each of these problems tend to be very personal, so it feels like it's something that could have been solved by having a kind of a lifeboat or something that like everybody understands, and instead the lifeboat has holes popping up in it, and then you're like, the temptation is just to like put your finger in the hole, and then water starts shooting through another one. So it's like what was important was to build a solid raft, but instead you were just like running around poking out, or like trying to cover up the holes with band-aids or whatever. And that's when you can, I think, you start to see it, and that becomes more taxing for everyone. That's individuals don't feel as clear about what they should be up to. Those who seem to be taxed with the like decisions of making that a comfortable environment to be in feel like they're too far behind to even catch up, and so forth. So I think those are some observations that I've seen. And there's a question from Moataz. So how do you convince a CEO or maybe a lead in cultural change if management is not on your side? So you mentioned that you kind of have to have alignment and buy-in, and that's the foundation that somehow allows later decisions to be there. But what if there isn't alignment from the beginning? Can you continue, or is there some massaging that needs to be done to find that?
I'd say 2 things. first of all, be curious. What is it that motivates the CEO or the rest of the management team? If they're profit driven, then talk about the cost of turnover in staff, sickness, all of these things, and find the cases of companies who've worked with culture and experienced a high degree of retention and good results, etc. So they're speak their language, because trying to convince from your own standpoint is just it's a lost cause, basically. That's the one thing. The other one is do it in your own within your own bubble, so to speak. So if you're head of people and culture, start doing some of these practices within your own team and show that it works. Because then, all of a sudden, the marketing lead will be curious and go like, what's going on over there in people and culture team? Can we get some of that vibe? So that's another way, like show, don't preach.
Splendid. Romina, I saw a digital hand followed by Jake.
Sure. I mean, I'll just echo what Thea said. I fully agree with role modeling as much as you can and creating small pilot areas if you're in a role without the authority to make the changes. I think the CEO has to want the change. I think you can't really get very far if you don't have top sponsorship, obviously. But you can make things better for the people on the teams by role modeling. And the other thing I was going to say, yeah, this is very interesting, by the way, is sorry, I think I've forgotten my train of thought at the management. When it comes to like having management on your side, would be just to like really make them feel like they're part, that like they're the ones leading the change, right? It's like really constantly paint or define the current state and what the future state is. Where are we going? What do we want? What do you all want? How can we get there together, and have those sort of more larger picture conversations as part of a regular, one of the regular meetings that you're already having. But I really feel that to an earlier point you were making, if you are getting out in front and defining the current state and where we're hoping to go and what are your thoughts and all of those things, then that allows people to opt in or opt out to that future state you're building in a very natural way. And the other thought was just that you will hit certain inflection points where if you haven't done the work, you're going to have some really big issues. So try to get out ahead of the next inflection point. Like, so before you hit 25 people, make sure you got some stuff happening, because otherwise you're going to have problems at 25 and you have problems at 40. it's just the way team dynamics.
Yeah, definitely. There are some numbers there to keep in mind. Usually by 15, you need to start organizing in some kind of team. By 50, you need to have some alignment mechanisms that are more than just gathering people together, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Thank
good
you.
point there. Good point.
Super. Jake, take it away.
Thanks, Nathan. To be honest, a lot of what I was interested in has kind of been covered since I raised my hand, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, just in case it spurs off any other threads. So, and yeah, found this very interesting so far. I guess the thing I'm wondering about is to what extent you think it's possible to kind of retroactively adapt an organization to work in this way versus it needing to be kind of built like this from the ground up. Mm-hmm. And if you think it is possible to be retroactively adapted in this way, how and like where would you start? Let's say you're a consultant working with an organization that's like 50 people that's experiencing problems. obviously it's hard to talk about this in a kind of generic, contextless way, but how might you think about finding a starting point?
Well, thanks for that question. I am a consultant working with a company experiencing these things. They're around 70. They're not having problems as such, but they can see that they're now building the hierarchy that they do not wish to have. So they reached out and asked, how can we, at this point, start building something different? And they have already the classical like siloed teams of experts. And what we've done is to go team by team to get the people on board, so that it's the teams transforming and understanding what this is about, just an experiment at the time. So again, good enough for now, safe enough to try. In one team, they're distributing the roles, the leadership roles, so that the current team lead has said, I'm stepping back as team lead, and we're distributing the leadership responsibility in the team. And that's what they're trying at the moment. And then next thing, they'll probably start talking about how to plan their vacation and time off and et cetera as a team, give feedback to each other as a team, et cetera. At the same time, at the overall company level, they have started looking into some of these key practices. And they're very courageous. So the first one that they're looking at is salary, which is usually quite of a difficult one. But they're all in. So now they're running an experiment with distributing salary negotiations to the teams. So saying, here is the money that you can work with. And you decide how the principles upon which you want to distribute this within the team. There are some guidelines. So it is very, as you can hear, it's experiment by experiment, practice by practice, team by team. There is not one way of doing it, but there are, of course, recommendations as to where you may start. I would not recommend starting with salary, but in this context, it does make sense. Hope that gave some inspiration.
Thank you. Great. Stephanie, you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thea. You, I think in my opinion, you really hit the nail right at the point, and I was nodding quite many times. What I'm just wondering, out of your experience, I mean, your CFO example really resonated to me, and I completely understand. When I look at founders, they have their strengths and they build up, and then they need this kind of structure or security and everything, and then they just think, okay, that's gonna work, and then they somehow find out that's not really working. I'm just curious, have you ever experienced that when it's not really working in this cultural fit? Is it going to work sometime or not really? I mean, it's a bit of a tricky question, but
It is a mindset game, but what I've seen is if as a founder, as a CEO, for example, you are able to get to the more like personal side of the person you've brought in, by being vulnerable yourself, like showing, this is what we stand for, it's not easy, etc. You might actually be able to bring that to the rest of your team, and this person that you've brought in can relax and maybe take off some of that professional mask. Lalou talks about this, wearing a mask at work. So it's not a company I work with, but a huge Danish scale up, very successful, and they started very flat. Now they have built a little bit of a hierarchy as they've scaled to almost 1,000, and the CEO there is very, very focused on bringing your whole self to work, that aspect, and that of course affects the people that he attracts. but also brings forward that change in people who are part of the company, that you can actually take down your guards and be more of a whole person. And then you might start opening up towards new ways of doing things at work as well. Yeah. I don't have any like real life examples like that that I know of personally, but I heard him speak in a podcast the other day, and it reminded me of that when you asked.
Thanks.
Super. I'm gonna pop back up to a couple other questions. Thea, a little light one here for you, perhaps. Do we actually need titles? And particularly in the C-suite, CEO, COO, etc.
The world needs titles. It's I work with startups where they don't have any titles internally, or where they are co-CEOs because they refuse to decide that one person is the CEO because they founded this together. And it's the pressure from the context that forces them to work with titles, but internally they don't. They're just colleagues. So no, on the inside of the company, you don't need titles. You need roles and responsibilities. I can't stress enough how this is not about not having structures, not having clarity. It's about having different kinds of structures and other ways of aligning and creating clarity. So that would be my my quick 2 cents on that one. It's still needed outside, you don't need it inside, but you need roles and responsibilities.
And just add to that we're often asked that at Peerdom because the software encourages clarity of roles and responsibilities, and most people are splitting a kind of classical job position with that title, something like CEO, into several smaller units of work. And first, there is also sometimes legal compliance. So like you need to have in the register who the official CEO is. Yes. And so there's this like interface to society, not just like who do you hand business cards to, because you could really hand a business card with 3 role titles on it, and people would be a bit confused at first. And we actually experimented with that in the early days, like putting out business cards with like, this is a snapshot of my role portfolio. But yeah, I think one trick I've seen is that you kind of maintain both of those. Also in the software, you can, I'll try to remember to bring this up later, but you can put like a special thing on each person's profile, which is like, what's the outside job title and position. And then also like right underneath that, you actually see that job being split into the different roles that encompass it. So it's just a mapping of one label to many roles, which can be slightly more fluid or dynamic. Great. Next. So we were talking about resistance from the quote unquote top CEO or founder level or whatever. Nan Motaz is asking, what about resistant employees? So you mentioned kind of these points of like, cultural fit. Are there going to be victims along the way? And how do you deal with, those, for instance, who are promoting an unhealthy culture or something that doesn't fit in the vision of the culture you're trying to create?
It will be different answers depending on the leadership model of the company. So I can give one example from Microsoft, where I used to work, which is a hierarchical organization, yet working with new ways of working in pockets here and there. And one place where they installed a new way of working is that they ditched all KPIs. There are still some sales numbers to be reached, but otherwise you get your bonus and promotion based on a system where we look at your behavior. So it's your behavior towards your job. You know, are you performing in your job role? And then it's as much about helping others succeed and about building on others' ideas. So really, they wanted to go from a culture of like know-it-alls, fixed mindset, to a learn-it-alls growth mindset, and did that by really, really linking it to the incentive system. So again, the cultural foundation, the convictions here are built into the structures and practices that the employees experience. So those who did not want to move from a know-it-all fixed mindset, stuck in an old culture, they would like suffer from not getting their bonuses and promotions, and would slowly leave the company. That was the idea there. If you look at companies where you don't have any management, so you don't have these systems, it's self-led teams. The teams do these things. The teams provide the feedback or the give the perspective to each other. So that's where you filter out. It's a little bit of a peer pressure, rather than it's a manager telling you this is right or this is wrong. I'm quite convinced that people would leave when they feel, or when they really, I've seen that happening. People leave when they find out, okay, this is no longer an organization where I can run my ego, where I can, build a huge career and get lots of people under me, whatever it is that motivates me. So this is not a place for me any longer. And that can be a consequence of moving in this direction, that you will lose people along the way. And I talk openly to clients about that. Are you willing to run that risk?
Super, Romina. Don't feel interrupted as I pull up some screens in the background. Please ask away.
Awesome. I thought that was an interesting example, Thea, and I can understand that each organization has its own shifts to make in their own time, for sure. I think I noticed I had a little bit of an allergic reaction, if I may, to the idea of incentivizing even behavior change. Yeah,
I'm with you there.
Are you? Yeah, I thought you might be.
To share, because it's the reality that a lot of people are working with.
It's true, but I find that using retrospectives, kind of, to your point of allowing the peer pressure, like doing retrospectives after projects allows the peers to kind of keep each other in line, and then rewarding the team success in some way as opposed to rewarding individuals. For me, just sits better with the ethos of self-management. So I just wanted to share that little point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to take the opportunity to jump into the software for about 10 minutes and just bring up a couple ideas of really focusing on particular aspects in here that I think kind of reinforce, or that actually we use in practice to try to maintain some of these cultural foundations, and to, transparently share that with the team in a constant process. It takes part of our onboarding process and so forth, and it's a part of the tool itself. So a couple of the ideas that popped into our heads when we were thinking about scaling is really starting at the beginning with the map. The map inside of peerdom is a collection of roles and responsibilities, and somehow by explicitly mentioning what a particular role is doing, and what its purpose is, and what its responsibilities are, and who's holding it, is this top of the triangle that Thea showed earlier. It's really a matter of being clear about who's responsible for what and what they're doing. And this somehow as you're scaling, helps avoid several problems about or tensions that can arise from a lack of clarity of work, namely like that two people are maybe working on the same thing in parallel and don't know it, so kind of waste, or perhaps that they that one person is sort of overstepping their authority boundaries, and that kind of frustrates because, you know, somebody like did all this work and then somebody else stepped in and kind of said, okay, no, but that's not it. So I think these types of tensions can be resolved, and they only get more and more prevalent the larger and more complex the organization becomes. So really, like as the parts are moving around more frequently, I think this being clear about the roles and how, when new people are coming in, what they're truly working on, and how that delegation might have worked from you know, it being under somebody's wing to somebody else's wing. I think that's an important aspect of clarity. And so I also mentioned that for onboarding, it's super useful and important for newcomers while scaling to understand what their exact place is. So from a bird's eye view, when you click on someone, they say, okay, this is me, this is where I belong, these are the roles and responsibilities I have. This is, for instance, my profile and the roles and responsibilities that I've been assigned to begin with. I think that can provide a lot of framing around the work that you're going to be doing, and facilitate a little bit. Also on the map, we have this notion of purpose built into everything. So when you click on a group, like, I don't know, this design group, or even the organizational level, you always have this field called purpose. And I think this is subtle, it's very small, but to have a purpose-driven organization requires you to define purpose at every level. And although Peerdom really is non-opinionated, like it's not going to force you to put a purpose in. If you want, you just put a title. You can just define a group by title or a role by title, and that's enough information. I really encourage, if you're going to fill in one thing, to start with purpose. Like, why does this role exist? To what purpose is it filling? Why does this group exist? Why does the organization exist? And that stimulates, again, if you don't have an answer for that, then maybe you should go back to the drawing board and have those conversations. So using the map as a conversation starter, I think, can be very useful around purpose. And then I started to think about something that we call a mirrored role, which is a role that has been somehow duplicated into multiple places. I'm going to hop over to another map because they use this pretty elegantly. And this one's available, by the way, through the Discover page on our website, which is a showcase of different publicly accessible organizations. So this company has a bunch of so-called mirrored roles, and you can see them by seeing that they have like 2 tones in their color. So any of these that have 2 tones have been duplicated to another place inside of the organization. So for instance, they have a finance role inside of this team, but there's another finance role somewhere else. And if we kind of zoom out, I can see that, well, that finance role is also appearing here, and it's also appearing here, etc. And I noticed that by the visual pattern that's duplicated. And what that means is that, you know, this person is responsible for, you know, sending out invoices, budgeting, yada, yada, but in their own particular context. And by creating and duplicating that role, actually, and mirroring it a lot across the organization, it creates this group of people who are holding the same responsibilities and somehow a normalized or standardized role description, which is appearing in different places, and somehow also, I think, can help at scale to make it so that you don't end up with 2 roles that are basically the same thing in 2 different contexts with just slightly different wording, and people don't understand that there are even synergies that they can be learning from one another, for instance. So this idea of finding roles that might be similar enough that people can learn from one another as you're scaling, I think, can be quite useful. And that can be done through mirroring a role. And then you have this sort of added advantage that once you've mirrored a role across the organization, you can see who else is holding that role. So this is the group of people holding that finances role across all of the different groups inside of the organization. So it somehow builds this community of people who have similar roles but are in another place. And I think that gives you somehow a lateral connection to maintain learning, and for, you know, transfer of like facility of transfer from one department or area to another. So you have this kind of glue that's connecting you through another dimension. This is mirror role, and yeah, that's all I wanted to point out on the map app. Another thing that we use pretty often at Peerdom is the Pages app, which, by the way, you can install through the App Store. And once you've done so, you can build these, they're basically just little documents inside of Peerdom built with, where you have an image and text. And one little trick that we do is we have, let's see, I'm going to jump in on this. So we have a manual of me for each of our employees. And if you don't know this exercise, it's a pretty fun one to dig into, and you can pick different prompts, but it's a matter of like being transparent about like what the best way to work with your colleagues is. And by having this manual and being able to refer to it, I think that this sets an interesting cultural foundation as well for understanding your colleagues and for being able to work together, and for being a little bit more clear about like, yeah, having a framing for perhaps why decisions are being made from one of your colleagues, some more context to that. And I guess similarly to that manual, actually, that makes me think about the missions app. And the missions app is a way of each individual expressing their personal mission. So it's not just why are we here? What's the organizational mission? But what are all of the individuals trying to achieve within this organization as well? And I think that this combination of individual missions and putting Pages with manuals to facilitate collaboration between individuals are two ways of strengthening the cultural glue and for cohesion, for working together. Yeah, so that's the Pages app, missions app, and the map. And just one last tip or thing that we do personally is try to give accountability as well to some of these rituals and practices. So really the middle part of the pyramid, which is to say how, like, who's thinking about it, who's out there looking for new practices and bringing them in, who's going to, you know, carve the space out for regular rituals in order to address these and to keep up with the hygiene necessary in order to not let it just, you know, entropy take place. And what we've done is we've put it into a single role called the culture gardener. And this, the responsibilities are effectively looking at these ways of tying people together and of, you know, really reinforcing what the principles and values are, and to be more transparent about that. So it's giving accountability so it doesn't become diffused across the founders or, you know, people in culture or whatever, like that there is at least a home for it. And one thing that we do with this role, which I think is just a little added cherry on the top, is to make it a so-called elected role. So that means that if you see this little triangle on top, that means that it's been that you can be elected into that role, and that you have a term limit effectively. And so that's through the elections app where you can do so. And you can actually, of course, in this case, it looks like I'm infinitely elected, but you could put an election date to be, I don't know, until tomorrow, for instance. And by doing so, the elections app will also point out what upcoming elections there are and when your term limit is up inside of that role. But the reason that I think that it's interesting to make the culture gardener role elected is that I don't see culture as being fully defined by one person, but more rich if it's defined by several people over time. So you kind of like take different points in the tapestry and use that as the approximation of the culture, rather than like one single person's vision of what the culture should be. So this is, yeah, these are several tips or things that we do, the way that Peerdom can facilitate that. And that is what I've got to share with you there. I see that there are several questions or some wrap-up comments. That's perfect. smoothly coming into the 1 hour mark. And if there are any closing words, I encourage them, or questions. I don't know if you have it about the software. I suppose you can always contact us. We'll send out a little email with the recording of this, which I seem to have started a couple minutes late. So maybe we'll stitch together a small intro for you after this. And then, yeah, hit us up with any questions. And thank you for coming out so numerous in numbers and with such stimulating conversation points. It's been awesome. So
big thanks from my side as well. Thank you for your questions and discussion and comments. I put in a link to an article about the culture canvas in the chat if you're more curious. Yeah, and please connect on LinkedIn and stay in touch.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.